Richie, Florida State, we were wondering last week if they would pick anybody up out of the portal. They finally have a couple of commitments. We'll talk about both of them, but they actually made a pretty big splash. I know that we've been negative. Maybe we'll get negative later too. But try and start this out with some pretty good positivity. Florida State lands, honestly, like the top DB available per On3. When he committed, he was the top available player in the portal in Jeremiah Wilson. And a kid that, Florida State never struggles to recruit DBs. Pat Surtain, I wish he could recruit every position because he is that good and seems to do a really good job. I think at a place like Florida State, a school, a program that's in that conversation for DBU always, I'm not necessarily doing backflips when you land a good DB because that's the expectation here. The expectation is to land really good talent everywhere. But at DB specifically, they continue to do a really good job, and they get a top player in the portal. And again, I don't know that this was one of the highest priority positions that we talked about when we went through every single position of, on the roster and said, like, would they get here? Would they not get here? But we did say, if you can go out and land a stud, if you can go out and land a guy that you really think could be a number one or could be, take the bulk of the lead of what you need at the cornerback position, then you go do it. And they went out and did this. And I think they have significantly raised the ceiling and the floor of that room. And I think what it'll do is I think you're not waiting on two guys to emerge now. Like you need one guy to step up and be that other corner. And then you can use other pieces as depth, whether that's Arnaud or Rawls or just whomever in that room. And so I think you've probably solidified one spot. Now, a long way to go until you get to August 30th against Bama, but you will have the summer workouts. You will have fall camp. And we've been questioning a lot about Florida State. This was a absolute solid. I even saw, there hasn't been much for them to give praise about. I even saw rivals saying like, all right, well, that's a pretty good take. That's a good pickup. So Florida State goes out and lands Jeremiah Wilson, a big pickup there at the cornerback position.
Yeah, one that I'm really excited about. He's bounced around a bit. He was at Syracuse, then at Houston. Now he's coming to Florida State. So he keeps upgrading because yes, Houston is an upgrade from Syracuse. But at the same time, I'm a little bit partial to this one because, he played at Osceola High School, which is in Kissimmee, right down the road from me. So, always love seeing a local kid end up at Florida State. And, like you said, even when Florida State, if you look at their worst rosters of the past 20 plus years, the DB room was always pretty solid, if not elite. So it is an expectation at Florida State, especially, when you get Florida kids homegrown, DB is probably the strongest position coming out of the state of Florida. And for him to come here, I think he's an instant starter. I think he's a guy that will probably come in and start from day one when he gets here. And I think he's just the guy that we talked about again. That DB was probably on the lowest level of what our needs when we talked about last week. But at the same time, to your point, you said, if we could get an impact player, you take him, and he certainly fits the bill.
I'll get right back to chatting with Richie, but as we like to remind you, make sure that you are checking out BetUS TV for all of their coverage on NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs. They've got a bunch of draft coverage that just wrapped up as well. Make sure you're following them on social media. We appreciate BetUS TV for their support. Yeah. No, he's a good pickup for Florida State, and kind of nothing but positivity there. Like I have no negativity about that take. And hopefully they can add more talent like that. We always talk about how in the spring portal there's not as much just A+ talent. I don't know that this isn't like this. I don't, to be somewhat measured. I don't know that this is a can't miss, like absolute shutdown number one corner or anything like that. But I do think that when you can, he was certainly probably the best cornerback you could have gotten, right? Like, so anytime you land that, you got to go out and do it. And Florida State's done a good job of getting him in and solidifying that defense a little bit more. We've talked about having some comfortability with the defensive line, having some comfortability with the linebacker unit that you've got. And you need to make sure the secondary is taking care of their business too. And you certainly have taken a step towards ensuring that there. And then they also pick up a transfer from a quarterback. This feels like, and I don't know what Florida State fans will think about this. I don't know what your take is on it. They pick up a cornerback, Jalen King, from out of Georgia, Folkestone, Georgia, but was at both Gardner Webb and East Tennessee State University. Very developmental type pickup, but has rushed for over 800 yards and 10 touchdowns. So maybe a little bit of a Trevor Jackson replacement, just somebody to have on the roster. See how they develop, see if there's something in a couple of years, use them on the scout team, use them on the practice team some. This is not one that I'm doing backflips over, but you've just added a little bit of depth to that room. I certainly would imagine he's QB4 at best within that room, but you lost a quarterback in Trevor Jackson. You kind of need an emergency guy in case, who knows what the heck happens. And so Florida State adds a kid with, at the end of the day, he's got nearly 3,000 passing yards and almost 1,000 rushing yards in his couple of seasons. He played 10 games at East Tennessee State University last year. So, not lighting the world on fire. I'm not doing backflips here, but you add to that depth in that room for sure.
And I think that's what you need. People can say what they want about Jimbo, and I know Florida State fans are very mixed about him. But, when it comes to quarterbacks, there's not a better head coach. When he was coaching, when it comes to developing and evaluating quarterbacks. And he always said, you need at least 4 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. And that's what this does. It just adds that extra layer of depth. You hope things never go completely south to where you have to get to your number 4 quarterback. But we saw it just last year, or excuse me, in 2023, when, Jordan Travis goes down, and then, out of nowhere, Brock Glenn is having to start against Louisville. So you need depth at that position. And again, I don't think he'll ever be a starting all ACC type player, but at the same time, it's just good to add depth to the position group, because you're going to need it, especially with the offense that Gus Malzahn is going to run. He's going to expect his quarterbacks to run the ball. When that happens, injuries tend to happen. So I think this is a good pickup. I'm not going to, again, to your point, I'm not going to say it's an amazing pickup, but it is a good addition to the QB room.
Yeah. Is it Evan? I can't see the comment super well. Yeah, that's a good point that he makes there. We don't have a quarterback committed in the 26 class. We've gone after a few guys and not done a super great job there. And we've had a decommitment. Obviously, Smigel just went to committed to Michigan. So I do think that you do need to fill that room out if you're not going to do it in the recruiting rankings. You got to fill that somewhere. And so, yeah, that's a really good point there. And Levin, I appreciate your comment. We'll see what Florida State can do otherwise in the portal. I know they're hosting a DB from, or in communication and potentially hosting a DB from Hawaii. I don't have every single update from the portal of who they're still targeting. I still think they need to bring a few more in. They've lost some guys. There is some space on the roster. I don't know that they're in it for anybody that's like a massive impact type guy. You're not going to Hawaii and just getting, a crazy stud or anything. But I would like to see them add a little bit more, Richie. There's no doubt that, you've had some spaces open up. We'll talk about another departure here in a minute. But I think that they could continue to add there, whether it's on, we've talked about offensive line. You had a departure there in Jalen Early. That was certainly a depth piece. Wide receiver, you had some departures. We talked about some guys that were maybe good targets last week. Most of those guys have already committed, or you're not really in the picture for them. So I don't really know what's left out there on the wide receiver front. You're probably not picking up somebody that's going to make a massive impact for you. But I do think that, they could certainly do a little bit more work there. I would love another safety. I'd love another defensive lineman. If you could find a wide receiver that was going to be anything more than like a wide receiver 4, you probably would take them too. I don't know if that exists yet, or still not yet. But I'd like to see them do a little bit more work there. They have 2 portal commitments. One guy is not going to make an impact this year, and then one guy is a huge impact. Now, obviously, they did a good job in the December window, and they took a lot of guys there. But if you can bolster the roster a little bit more, now you certainly should.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the recruiting at the high school level beat this like a dead horse. It's not been great, right? So you kind of have to have lived in the portal, and hopefully that high school recruiting does turn around. There's the chance this class this year could end up being a top 10 class. We'll see what happens as things continue. But at the same time, you to have a competitive season if you want to get to 7, 8, maybe even 9 wins, I know that sounds crazy. You're going to have to continue to add pieces in the portal to fill out the roster gaps because unfortunately there are a lot of gaps on the roster right now.